Voices. Many voices, one passion. Pro cycling, for fans, by fans.
Hello and welcome to podcast number 10 on May 19th, 2013. This is Chris in Virginia, and I am joined tonight by Tim in London. Tim, how are you doing?
I'm doing very well, thanks.
Yeah, we're missing Kathy tonight because she has left us home alone as she is at the Galibier today to watch that glorious summit finish.
And we are not green with envy at all.
Not at all. It looked cold up there, though. I hope she took some winter clothes. That's all I have to say. So we'll be hearing from Kitty next time, and she'll tell us all about her experience of visiting the Giro. It sounds like she had a great time, even though I know the stages that she went to see had to be highly modified because of the weather. So it'll be interesting to hear about her experience. All right, tonight we're going to talk start with a little bit about the Tour of California, which actually just ended about an hour ago as this recording. And then, of course, we're going to jump in and we're going to talk about the second week of the Giro d'Italia. We'll talk about the stages that happened over the last week. We'll talk about the riders that we're looking at. We'll talk about some things that have surprised us in the second week and also some of our favorite moments. And then, of course, we'll review how we're doing in our Giro Fantasy League. Rumor has it that Tim relinquished the Maglia Rosa in the VeloVoices competition.
I'm saying nothing.
All right, so this week in California has been the Tour of California. And for people, I saw a lot of people on Twitter, Tim, saying that they thought the Tour of California was a boring race. But if they think that, they surely haven't been watching this week's Tour of California. So let me go just briefly talk about what happened during the week, and then we can talk a little bit about your thoughts, and then we'll move on to the Giro. So stage one was basically a circuit around Escondido, and everybody expected it to be a sprint finish. But with 2 kilometers to go, Louis Westra attacks the front, basically the entire peloton with sprinters, and wins the stage. So very exciting to see him do that. Nobody was expecting, and of course everybody was expecting Peter Sagan to win.
Yeah, and a really timely win as well, given Vacan Soleil's sponsorship situation.
Yeah, absolutely. And he was wearing the new kit, so I mean, he looked great, and it was a fantastic win. And then in stage two was to Greater Palm Springs from Murrieta. It was 198 kilometers, and the first 2 days, Tim, of this were like 110-degree days in the United States and in California. And this day, supposedly some of the temperatures reached 120 degrees. So we're talking super hot. And the finish on this tramway road, I've never seen anything like it. The peloton blew to pieces, and James Hagens-Bergman, Yanir Acevedo, a domestic rider, won the stage and took the overall lead. So nobody was expecting that. And TJ Van Garderen finished shortly behind him to be in second place in the GC.
Yeah, and that was it was brutal to watch, wasn't it? It's almost the complete opposite of the weather we've seen at the Giro this week. But they hit the first steep ramps, and as you say, the peloton just exploded.
Yeah, and can you imagine these guys who are just coming over from the classics in Europe where it's been freezing cold, and now all of a sudden they're faced with basically an oven to ride in. So then in stage 3, it got a little bit more reasonable, kind of met our expectations with Peter Sagan winning at the end in a bunch sprint, but he kind of had to do a crazy move to win. And ironically enough, Andy Schleck got him the break that day, which I don't think anybody was expecting. So it was nice to see Andy Schleck out there and getting some camera time. And the American audiences love him, so it was great. And then in stage 4, it was expected to be a sprint finish, and it was. And American Tyler Farah won, and he, turned on the afterburners. Sagan was 6th in that, so that was a fast, dead heat, and Farah looked great. And it was nice to see him win after such a dry spell for him. And then stage 5, I think, might be one of the most exciting stages I've seen this year. This was classic Jens. This was from Santa Barbara to Avila Beach, and it was 185 kilometers. And about halfway through the stage, the wind started picking up. And of course, Savvy Jens notices that and decides to take his Radio Shack team to the front and just hammer in the crosswinds. They end up splitting the field into 6 echelons, and the front echelon has these guys in it. It's TJ Van Garderen, Michael Rogers, Jens, Matt Busha, Markel Irizar, Tyler Farah, Tor Hushoff, Michael Schar, Baden Cook, Mitchell Docker, Michael Matthews, Christian Meyer, Jonathan Cantwell, Jay McCartney, Alex Candelero, who's the only domestic rider to make the front group, and then you had Peter Sagan and Thomas de Gent. So this was the front group, and once they got about a 40-second lead on everybody else, nobody could bring them back. Sylvain Chavanel tried to bridge up fruitlessly. Nobody could bring him back. And so, of course, Jens recognizes that there's better sprinters in this group than him, with Farah there and Sagan there. So with 5 kilometers to go, he attacks the group, and they can't bring him back. And he crosses the finish line at first with his arms raised. It was fantastic.
41 years young.
Yeah. And then, Tim, I didn't get to see it. You actually watched the time trial.
Yeah, I watched quite a bit of it. It was another difficult stage, a tough uphill finish, and TJ just blew everyone away. He was outstanding, and he consolidated his lead, and it was just a fantastic ride from a maturing rider. Yeah,
and I know that the end of that time trial had, they climbed 1,000 feet in the last 3 kilometers, so it was kind of a leg breaker at the end too. And then follow that up with stage 7, which the riders go up Mount Diablo. And that was a fantastic stage, too, because you had BMC on the front trying to control the attacks. But the domestic riders really, lit it up at the end with Leopold Koning from NetApp Endura, winning the stage on a late attack from Yanir Acevedo, who was trying to get a little bit more time back on TJ, but he was really trying to beat Cameron Meyer to the podium. And as far as I know, he did that. So I haven't seen the results of today's stage as far as the GC, but I don't think anything changed. So kudos to Acevedo for making the podium as a domestic rider against a bunch of World Tour class teams. And congratulations, obviously, to TJ Van Garderen on this victory. So with this victory, this kind of begs the question, Tim, who should BMC be backing at the Tour de France this year? Should it be Cadel Evans or should it be TJ Van Garderen?
Yeah, it's difficult, isn't it? I think Cadel, a little bit like Bradley Wiggins, has been hedging his bets a little bit about whether he's going to try and attack the Tour de France full bore. But you look at the Giro, and we're going to talk about how hard that's been, particularly this last week. And you look at Van Garderen's form, and you see a guy here. He's still only 24. He's got quite a bit of experience under his belt already, and he's on an upward curve. So he was 4th at the Tour of California last year. He was 5th the year before, and of course he was 5th at the Tour last year. And then easily forgotten because it was towards the end of the season. But at the World Championships, he was 4th in the time trials. So here's a guy who can climb pretty well, who can time trial with the best of them, and has lots of experience now under his belt, including a top 5 at the Tour. So I think what BMC do really depends on whether they're looking forwards or looking backwards. If you're looking forwards, you have to go with TJ.
Yeah, I think so. And I think after this Giro d'Italia, how difficult it's been, it's going to be interesting to see if Cadel can really recover in time to actually be a legitimate contender.
Yeah.
So I was looking at some of the domestic riders in the Amgen Tour California, and some guys really stuck out to me. First of all, this Yanir Acevedo, this domestic from where was he from? I think he was from Jameis. This climb up the Tram Road was his kind of coming out party. I mean, he really put guys in the hurt. Really interesting to see him. And another one who was looking great on that climb and all the climbs was Philippe Degman. He was looking fantastic. So those are 2 guys to keep an eye out on. And then, of course, the guy who won the Queen stage up Mount Diablo, Leopold Koenig, he just seemed to know which wheels to ride and when to attack. And I think he's definitely one to keep an eye on. It'll be interesting to see if NetApp can hold on to him. But one of the guys that impressed me the most was this young Lawson Craddock from the Bontrager team. He was 7th on the Queen stage, and I think he will win Best Young Rider for a Tour of California. I mean, Koenig came up there, Acevedo, then it was TJ, Michael Rogers, Matthias Frank, Matthew Busha, and then Craddock was the 7th guy. up that mountain. So be interesting to see which team is able to procure his services. He kind of reminds me a little bit of a Joe Dombrowski, but a little stockier, maybe a little bit better time trialer. So who knows? So Tim, what do you think about? I mean, I know a lot of people have said, at least the organizers anyway, that the Tour of California, they want people to think of it as the kind of fourth Grand Tour. Is that realistic?
I'm not sure it is. I think certainly not at the moment. I think you've got to remember here you're looking at a race that's relatively young. You're trying to compare it against the three-week Grand Tours in Europe. And to be honest, do you really want to be considered to be the fourth Grand Tour, or do you just want to be considered to be the biggest and the best of the week-long races? Because I think, actually, its position in the calendar is interesting. It's a good warm-up for the Tour de France for those riders who aren't going to the Giro. It's got plenty of challenges. It's got a little bit of everything. Good sprints, some really tough climbs, some great preparation in terms of the weather as well. We all know how hot it can be in France in July, and certainly the weather this week has been perfect preparation for that.
Yeah, a lot of people have asked me if I think May's the right time, and I know a lot of people are like, it shouldn't be during the Giro d'Italia. But for guys that aren't going to ride the Giro, it is the perfect race for training for the Tour and for getting ready. So, and I love watching the Giro in the morning and the Tour of California at night. So it's one of my favorite times of the year, frankly.
Yeah, and the question is, if you don't have the Tour of California in May, when exactly in the calendar does it fit?
Yeah. And it doesn't really fit anywhere in the calendar. I mean, this seems like where it's going to be if it's going to continue. So hopefully it will continue, because it's really, like I said last week, some of the only exposure that people in the United States get for cycling. It was on the final stage today was on NBC. It wasn't on NBC Sports. It was on NBC, which is huge for them. So, all right, well, let's leave the Tour of California, because the Grand Tour is happening in Italy right now, and we've gone into the second week, and boy, the second week has really given us some unexpected outcomes. So Tim, why don't we start talking about stage 10? That was after the rest day, and that's where some of these unexpected things started to happen.
Oh yeah, and often after a rest day, you get a relatively straightforward stage to almost ease the riders back in, and that absolutely was not the case here. So stage 10 was the first high mountain summit finish at Alto Piano del Montasio. What happened? I mean, really, this was a bit of an all-action stage. We saw Sky, for a change, going on the offensive. They sent Sergio Henao up the road and effectively sacrificed him to set up Rigoberto Urán for the win, which catapulted him up to third overall. We had Carlos Betancourt, who went on another late solo charge to finish second. Vincenzo Nibali and Astana actually defended their positions really well. They only covered the moves they needed to, and Nibali had Cadel Evans pretty much glued to his wheel the entire day. And the only real down point, I guess, was Bradley Wiggins, who was left to fend for himself, ended up losing nearly a minute, and subsequently I think we've understood a little bit more as to what the reasons behind that were.
Yeah, so we'll talk a little bit more about his chest infection, and his physical well-being basically has really affected his riding. Well, that takes us then into stage 11, which was a medium mountain stage, basically coming after the summit finish you just mentioned, finishing in Vejant. And I think this was a day really where the GC contenders were content to basically allow a breakaway to happen, and that's exactly what happened. We know that rider Hejidal had lost a lot of time already at this point, and is also suffering from some kind of physical illness. I'm not sure if it was chest infection like Wiggins or not, but ironically enough, his teammate, Lithuanian, and I'm going to butcher this, Ramūnas Navardauskas, basically he got in a 20-man strong breakaway that went away around 80 kilometers into the stage, and then he basically bided his time and attacked at the right time, and I think it really came down to him and Daniel Oss in the end, and he just rode Oss right off of his wheel and won. And then we also had Perazzi attacking and on his quest for mountain points, and I'm just wondering if some of these efforts, Tim, do you think sealed the deal on the mountains at this point?
Well, I think,
or do you think?
Well, he picked up good points today. I think he took maximum points over the Col du Telegraph, and he's got a pretty decent lead now in the mountains competition. You have to look at it as there's the two big long mountain stages to come, 19 and 20. 19, they've got to go over the Gavia and the Stelvio, and I would imagine that we'll see Perazzi take off in the break there, looking to get points that could well seal the deal for him. So I think he's looking pretty strong for the mountains jersey.
Yeah, I know that actually he got second on the Telegraph today. Visconti actually attacked right before and got the Telegraph points and then got the Galibier points too. So Visconti's the closest person to him with something like 40 something points.
No, that's right.
So I mean, it's still a space of 20 points, but we still have some big summit finishes and big mountains to get over. So it'd be interesting to see if Visconti makes a go at trying to win the mountains jersey as well. Now, what about this move by Ramunis? Is this a great move for Garmin? Is this what they need to be doing now, going stage hunting? And do we think that they'll win any more stages?
I think it was almost their only option. I think with Ryder gone, I think they were a team that was set up purely to support him in his quest to defend his 2012 title. So I think stage hunting is absolutely the way to go. Navadauskas is a pretty decent sprinter. He's a strong guy. He'll look to get into more breaks. There probably aren't that many opportunities, in all honesty, but I think the fact that they've won a stage, they can be pretty happy with their tour, given that they've had to switch to Plan B.
Yeah. All right. Well, that takes us then, Tim, to stage 12, which was not in the mountains.
Oh, absolutely not. The shortest stage of this year's race, just a trifle really, at 134k. It was short, it was flat, it was wet, and in all honesty, it was as close to a procession as we will see in this year's race. Omega Pharma Quickstep were always in control of this stage. They set up the lead outs perfectly, and once Gert Stegmans had dropped off Mark Cavendish within touching distance of the finish line, even the torrential rain could do nothing to prevent the Manx missile from launching himself to victory. So that was win number 10 of the year and win number 100 of his career. But really, the big action was happening behind him as Bradley Wiggins lost even more time and then promptly abandoned the following morning. I did notice he promptly caught quite a lot of abuse online. Do you think really any of that was fair?
I don't think it's fair. I mean, he obviously wasn't going that well. Something was definitely wrong. I mean, I think it was fair maybe to criticize the whole descending fear, because that's something that you can kind of prepare for and get your head mentally around. And we know that he lost time there. But when you're basically getting shelled off the back because you can't breathe, you got chest issues, I don't think it's really fair to criticize a guy for, at least finishing the stage and saying, you know what, I'm not well, it's time for me to go. So I don't think it was fair. Yeah. I don't think it's fair to criticize him for that.
Yeah, I think I'd agree with that. And I think we've also seen John Degenkolb, we've seen Nasser Buhani also withdraw, and both of them just cited fatigue. And I think it's becoming increasingly obvious that the combination of a challenging parkour and really some absolutely terrible weather is really taking its toll on the riders. Yeah,
and when I think about the criticism of Wiggins too, I don't hear that same criticism when you talk about Hajidal or Buhani. Nobody's going, oh, what's wrong with Hajidal? Everybody's like, oh, poor rider. We hope you feel better. And really, that's the sentiment that we should be giving Wiggins as well, I think. So, for guys that spend that much time training, I mean, this was really Wiggins' year goal to try to win the Giro, and it was Hajidal's. So for those guys, and this is part of life, I understand, but for those guys to spend all that time training and really working to try to be their best during this 3-week period, and then to get sick basically on your wedding day, right? You got to feel bad for guys that go through stuff like that. Anyway, okay, stage 12, which was flat and miserable, rainy, led us into stage 13, which was also kind of flat, at least the first part of it was, but it was also the longest stage of the Giro. So we go from the shortest stage to the longest stage. And, Tim, we haven't been talking about star ratings. We should be, but I gave this one a 4 out of 5. and which I usually don't give any sprint stages more than a kind of a 3 out of 5 because they're sprint stages. But this was interesting because it was kind of lumpy terrain at the end, and Cavendish and the Quick Step team, I mean, they worked their tails off to basically minimize attacks and make sure that this turned into a sprint at the finish. And when it did, Cav really didn't have guys at the end because they'd done so much work for him just keeping it all together. And so he had to sprint from way back, and he was still able to take the victory. His 101st victory, his 4th victory of the Giro d'Italia. So why didn't either me or you pick Cav for our fantasy cycling team?
Yeah, that sound you hear is me banging my head against a brick wall.
Right.
Because instead I went for Degenkolb and Buhani, who obviously, as we've just discussed, are not in the race anymore. Do you know what? I have no idea. To say I'm regretting the decision is putting it mildly.
Yeah, I think I know why. I mean, we've followed Cav from the beginning of the year, and I think you and I had doubts about the quality of that lead-out train because in the Classics, it just wasn't happening. But whatever they did between the Classics and the Giro, it has worked. I mean, 2 of his victories, he's been dropped off by Gert Stegmans 100 meters from the line with nobody in front of him. So unbelievable work there.
Yeah, and there's some great work that's being done further back in the sprint train. And I know Kathy will raise a smile when I mention Ilio Kaiser. But
he's been brilliant.
But yeah, he has powered that team through kind of the last, so from around about kilometre 5 to kilometre 3, which is a critical part of the lead out. And OPQS have been magnificent in getting Cav to the final kilometre.
Yeah, if you would have asked me before the Giro started that if you would have told me that Cav was going to win 4 stages, I would have been like, okay, maybe 2. But, kudos to him. He's been fantastic. So we'll talk about his grade a little bit later. All right, so Tim, that takes us to stage 14, which was basically the first Alpine stage summit finish, right?
Yeah. So this was finishing in the just outside the town of Bardonecchia. And in terms of star rating, well, I'd like to give it a 4 out of 5. It's quite difficult to tell because obviously most of us only saw the final 4 to 500 metres.
Right.
But and I think everyone knows what happened. We had Sestriere that was dropped for safety reasons. And so it all came down to the final climb, where Sergio Henao, again, he gave it a good go. But ultimately, it was Nibali who did the real damage and exploded the peloton, really. When he attacked, only Sant'Ambrogio could go with him. And he went on to lead the race leader over the line. And other than those two, all the main contenders lost some fairly sizable chunks of time.
Yeah, Gesink, boy, he was the big loser that day, going down basically from 4th place to 11th place.
Yeah, he lost over 4 minutes. He lost just on that one, and most of it in the last 5 to 6 kilometres, I believe. But I guess we ought to talk about this decision to drop Sestriere. Was it the right decision?
I think it was the right decision. First of all, the visibility on these mountains looked miserable yesterday, and if you're descending in that kind of weather and it's slippery, who knows? I mean, you could lose a guy and not even realize it. I think after the death of Wouter, especially at the Giro, the race organizers, RCS, have been very cognizant of rider safety. And for me, to be honest, that's what they should do. That's their job, is to make sure that they have a safe route that the riders can ride. And I think, even though we didn't get to see it because of the coverage, the satellite coverage couldn't work or whatever it was, it still ended up being an exciting finale. I mean, when those guys came through the fog, first of all, I thought it was just fitting that Sant'Ambrogio, as a glow stick, basically comes out of the fog first, right? He's the headlight, basically, of the peloton. But that was an exciting finish. I mean, those guys were seriously suffering. It wasn't like, they were just moseying on up to the finish. So I think it was the right choice.
Yeah, that's right. And I think the thing that did it for me was Sean Kelly on Eurosport he was asked, was it too dangerous to race? And he fairly unequivocally said, yes, it was. And if an old school hard guy like Kelly says it's too dangerous,
right,
then
that's right.
I'm inclined to believe it. And I mean, I understand the whole debate about taking safety too far and wanting to make sure that we have the chance to see epic racing. But as you say, these are people whose careers and lives we're talking about, and you have to take a sensible view. And the comparison I make is with Formula One, where you can get some epic racing in the wet in Formula One, but it's unbelievably dangerous, which is why they have safety cars. It's why they stop races until tracks can clear up. Yeah, the racing in the wet is fantastic, but you have to put the safety first.
Yeah, and you know what? That's what they did today on stage 15 as well. They shortened the stage by about, I think it was like 5 kilometers. So stage 15 basically was a modified alpine stage, and of course the finale went over the Col de Telegraph and the Col de Galibier. And the finish, they shortened it so that it would finish at the Pantani Memorial. I give this a star rating of a 3 out of 5. I thought that this stage, I don't know, I guess I just thought we were going to see some kind of epic battle here. And we did a little bit for the Young Riders jersey, but they let Giovanni Visconti get away on the Col de Telegraph, and it didn't seem like anybody wanted to bring him back. Vini's Rabatini really tried to bring him back, but Visconti was a man on a mission. And of course, as soon as he goes over the Telegraph and starts going up the Galibier, it starts to snow. And so the conditions turned for the worse. And it looked like to me that the GC guys were pretty fatigued.
Yeah, because we saw the whole that whole thing with the first 55-60k right up to the top of Mont Cenis being neutralised, and I think you can understand why. And clearly, yesterday's stage took an awful lot out of the riders.
Yeah, so I think this rest day is going to be coming at the right time, but boy, it's going to be interesting to see how people will respond after the rest day, and especially based on what we saw after this this rest day this last week. So what do we think about this Best Young Rider competition, Tim?
Do you know, I think it's of the 4 major jerseys, it's the most exciting one there is, I think.
It's super exciting.
Yeah, the jersey changed hands again today purely on the basis of the time bonus that Bettencourt picked up for finishing second. I think the gap between them now is 5 seconds. And it's not as if these are 2 guys that are kind of sitting well down the GC either. You know, they're 7th and 8th, I think it is.
Yeah.
You know, these guys are, you know, they're riding in pretty exalted company, and and they're doing a fantastic job.
I mean, Bettencourt has gotten 3 second place finishes in this Giro.
Yeah,
that's incredible riding.
Yeah, 3 seconds in the third.
Yeah, so unbelievable. Okay, so Tim, we have now completed 2 weeks of the Giro d'Italia. Why don't you summarize for us kind of where we sit as far as the standings? Yeah,
so the GC, now, interesting enough, when we talked last week, I think we said we were debating how close riders needed to be to still be in any kind of contention for the GC. And I think I said about 3 minutes was kind of the benchmark. And I said that I'd be surprised if there were more than 4 or 5 riders in contention. That's kind of pretty much how it's panned out. So we've got Nibali continuing in the race lead, obviously. Cadel Evans dropped about 45 seconds on Saturday's stage, so he's now 1:26 behind. And then behind it gets interesting. You've got Rigoberto Urán, who's at 2:46, and then 1 second behind him, Mauro Sant'Ambrogio, the mainstay of both our fantasy teams.
Yep.
And then beyond that, then the time gaps start to get pretty significant. You've got Scarponi at 3:53, Przemysław Niemiec, his teammate at Lampre, who's 4:35 behind in 6th, and then we have the 2 white jersey guys, Carlos Bettencourt and Rafael Majka, who are 5:15 and 5:20 behind. Pozzovivo's basically 6 minutes behind, and then former race leader Benjatin Chausti is 10th at 6:21. So the time gaps are becoming pretty significant now, and I think we saw a little bit of that today. Actually, over the last 2 days, Nibali isn't really that worried about anyone other than Cadel Evans because he's got everyone else in hand, and he can afford to give them a little bit of leeway. So that's the top 10 on GC.
Yeah, you know that Kathy actually predicted last week that Wiggins would abandon, and I thought she was crazy.
Yeah, and you know, I think kind of between us we got it pretty well, because I think Kathy absolutely said that. Brilliant call. I think I said that we'd see Sant'Ambrogio in the top 5, and that we'd see either Wiggins or Urán in the top 5, and that's kind of worked out as well. So I think that the one thing that has become really obvious over the last week is that if you look at the GC now versus what it looked like at the first rest day, it's actually changed quite a lot.
Yeah, it really has. It really has. Other than the 1 and 2, I mean, everything down below that has changed quite a lot. So.
Yeah.
All right, so tell us about the points jerseys.
Yeah, so with his 2 wins this week, Mark Cavendish is back in the red jersey on 109 points. Now, there's 2 big questions really. The first of which is he going to get over the high mountains, or will he climb off and save his legs for the Tour? But it's gonna but the only real stage that he's likely to have a chance of winning is the final stage, de Brescia. So his point scoring potential is relatively limited. So I'm looking beyond that. He's on 109. Cadel Evans is on 91. He's steadily picking up points with 4th, 5th, 6th place type finishes. But almost more interestingly, behind that, I wonder whether both of them might end up being overhauled by either Sant'Ambrogio, who's on 84, or Betancourt, who's on 79. And as you've said, Betancourt, he's picking up top 2, top 3 finishes on a pretty regular basis, and because he's that little bit further behind on GC, he's got that little bit more leeway to leap out of the pack without worrying about Nibali chasing him down all the time. So the points competition could end up being very, very close.
Well, personally, I hope Cav goes home because I don't want to see him win another stage in this because it's killing my fantasy team.
But the one jersey he won't be winning, obviously, is the Mountains jersey.
Right.
And there we've talked about Pirazzi is quite a way out in front at the moment. Obviously, still with quite some big climbs to go, but he is on 65 points. Visconti's on 42, which basically all his points came today. And then Colombia's Robinson Chalapud is on 28. But really, I think it's going to come down to Pirazzi and Visconti. And it could well come down to who has the more successful time in the breakaways.
Yeah, and then we talked about this Best Young Rider competition. We have Betancourt leading, and then how do you pronounce his last name?
I think it's Micah.
Micah.
Yeah.
I always want to say Majka. Micah just 5 seconds behind, and then Kelderman 8 minutes and 14 seconds back. But it was interesting, in today's stage, you saw all 3 of those guys being protagonists at the front of in that group. So who knows what's going to happen in that competition. It's going to be really interesting to see, whether Betancourt or Micah, which one of those guys takes this lead. And that, for me, this is the race to watch this week.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, although it's effectively a 2-horse race between Betancourt and Micah, but Kelderman, he's 8 minutes down, but as you say, he rode fantastically well today. He was yo-yoing a little bit, but you could see him fighting all the way, and he looked to be getting stronger as the stage went on. So all credit to him.
Yeah.
And interestingly, Kelderman's Blanco team they were leading the team classification at the end of the first week. They're now second. Sky almost inevitably have taken over, but they lead Blanco by best part of 6 minutes, and then Lampre are just a few seconds behind. So the team classification, it's not really considered to be that major, but it will come down to one of those 3, I think: Sky, Blanco, and Lampre, and obviously that's going to be decided in the big mountain stages next week.
Yeah. All right. Well, that was quite a second week. I'll tell you what. It's going to be interesting to see what this final week is. And the parcours in the final week are not easy, so who knows what's going to happen. All right. Well, so Tim, let's talk about some of our favorite moments of the week. I'll start. We talked about Cav already a little bit, but that 4th Giro stage win for him, it's always great to see. A lot of people don't understand what it takes to get a sprinter to the line. They just think that he magically appears at the end, and it's just the lead-out train that's the work. But the Quick Step demonstrated that it really takes an entire team to get their guy where he needs to be for the sprint. And the way they basically chase down every attack, and the way what Cav did at the end there to go from so far out, he knew that his team had done so much work for him. He was just not going to be denied. It didn't matter. He could have been 20 guys back, and he still would have won that stage.
Yeah, and I'll tell you what that stage reminded me of. It reminded me of the Milan San Remo he won in 2009. I guess it must have been, where again it was Colombia. They worked really, really hard to get him over the Cipressa and the Poggio at the end, and they burnt themselves off, but they got him into a position where, when Hausler went for the sprint, Cav still had the legs to get back to him. And it was much the same.
And he won by a nickel.
Yeah.
He won by a nickel. So, That was really great. And then of course that stage 14, just like waiting for the guys to emerge from the fog. It was almost, I didn't like the fact that we couldn't see the race, but it was pretty exciting to be like, who's it going to be? Who's it going to be? Who's behind door number 1?
It was bizarre though, wasn't it? It was like, oh look, there's a car. Oh no, a motorbike. Oh no, a car. Right. Oh, hang on a minute. Here come the riders at last. And it was brilliant. And if you were going to have 2 jerseys coming out the mist like that, you've got the glow stick of Sant'Ambrogio, and then you've got the
right.
the Maglia Rosa, which is a fairly bright jersey in itself.
Yeah, that was really great to see. All right, so what about you, Tim? What were some of your favorite moments?
It feels really odd, doesn't it? Your favourite moment involves Cavendish, and mine doesn't. But
right.
But for me, it was all about stage 10. I think the first high mountain summit finish of any Grand Tour is always an exciting moment, because it's the time when every GC contender just has to put his cards on the table and show us whether he's on form or not. And and that's exactly what we got. It was a great stage. We had sky riding with aggression and a degree of panache as well, which is not something we associate with them. We had
right.
we had Nibali and Astana defending superbly, both physically and tactically. A great win for Rigoberto Urán. We had all the subplots as well about what was happening with Wiggins, with Hajjadal, with Sammy Sanchez. We had contenders dropping like flies, really, and it's really set us up for the rest of the week and for the rest of the race as well. So that's been my favourite moment of the week.
Yeah, we had Bettencourt in there too. I mean, that was an incredible stage, super exciting. And the pictures, I don't know if you saw Jared Gruber's pictures of that stage, but if you haven't had an opportunity, they're beautiful.
Oh, they were.
I almost wanted to cry looking at them. They were so great. All right, so let's talk about surprises then. If you would have told me in week 1 that Wiggins and Hajjadal would be abandoning after the first week, I would have laughed at you. I mean, are you kidding me? And I kind of think, Tim, for the GC anyway, it's kind of taken the excitement out of it. I mean, I don't know if people are less excited because Nibali looks so dominant. It's like, who's going to beat him, So I'm a little disappointed by that. I was, it would be really interesting to see all of these guys healthy and competing in this rather than 2 guys leaving sick. So
because that's what you want, isn't it? You want to see all the big guns out there in top form, just slugging it out on mountain finish after mountain finish.
Yeah. And then we've already talked about Bettencourt. I don't know how he's carried. I mean, he had great form in the Spring Classics, and he's carried it into this Grand Tour. And he's kind of a revelation for me. It'd be interesting to see if he's going to be staying at his current team next year, because he's incredible. That we already talked about having 3 second place finishes and a 3rd place finish. And then I'm really surprised by the weather. The Giro d'Italia has always had some days where they've had interesting weather. We've seen the pictures of the snowy finishes and that kind of thing. But this entire 2 weeks so far, I mean, there's been a couple of sunny moments, but it's been miserable. It has been miserable, and so I've been surprised by that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I guess last year we were actually quite spoilt, and the weather across all 3 Grand Tours for the most part was very, very good. So, yeah, I think it's come as a bit of a shock to the system, not just to us fans, but obviously to the riders as well. And some of them have coped with it pretty well, and some of them haven't.
Yeah. So what about you, Tim? What are some of the things you've been surprised by?
I think the biggest thing is, and again we've touched on this already a little bit, it's a surprise and yet it's not a surprise. It's the way that, other than Nibali and Evans, the GC is it's been turned on its head repeatedly during the second week, and it's produced lots of lovely little subplots. So we had that first summit finish which effectively killed off Hajjadal and Sammy Sanchez. We've had all the drama around Wiggins. We had Robert Hessink yesterday, who'd been looking really strong up until that point, suddenly losing 4 minutes in a flash. And and for me, it puts the lie to everyone who was already declaring that the GC was locked down before even the individual time trial on stage 8 had ended. And we've said before that it's the unpredictability of the Grand Tours that makes them so fascinating, because over 3 weeks you've got the chance for all these little plots and stories to unfold, all the twists and turns. Just when you think you're on top of what's going on, suddenly someone throws a spanner in the works and it all changes. And this has been these last 2 weeks have been fantastic. It's twisted, it's turned. I mean, yeah, okay, we know now we're pretty sure now that Nibali is going to win, but we've got the white jersey battle. There's lots of subplots going on lower down the top 10. What is Sky going to do next week? So the last 2 weeks have been brilliant, and hopefully next week will be as well. Yeah,
and you know what? There's still some crazy ascending and descending to do. There could be a crash. There could be. I mean, you have no idea how this is going to end up. Still, I mean, it does definitely look like Nibali's going to take it, but you never know. Okay, so let's talk about the riders that we kind of chose to look at. And Tim, we've talked about him a little bit already, but I'll just let you talk about Wiggins, and then we'll move on.
Yeah. How do you grade Bradley Wiggins? You either give him a bad grade, or I'm almost inclined to say, do you know what? Not applicable. I'm not. I think obviously the chest infection he picked up has had it did have a profound effect on his performance, and particularly the weather didn't help. And do you know what? I'm not a paid up member of the Bradley Wiggins fan club, but I do kind of feel the need to defend him a little bit. I think he could easily have abandoned a day or two earlier when he started to drop down the order. I don't really see what purpose continuing on would have served other than to satisfy some outdated sense of machismo. So I think he's been criticised for continuing too long. He's been criticised for pulling out too early. And do you know what? Riders get ill. They're susceptible to respiratory infections, particularly when you take into account how little body fat they have to protect them against the kind of conditions they've been riding in. So, really difficult to judge his race. And actually, in terms of judging his season, I think what we will do, how we will judge him, is how he behaves over the next few weeks. If he starts stirring the pot with Chris Froome and the Tour, then I think he's going to be painted in a much more negative light. But if he comes back strong, he recovers, he does everything that he initially promised that he would do in supporting Froome's efforts to win the Tour, then we'll see him again in a completely different light. And so for me, this is a little bit of a watershed moment in Wiggins' career. Yes, he'll always be remembered as a Tour de France winner, but it will, how history views him, his behaviour over the next sort of month to 6 weeks, I think will really define that.
Yeah, and the Vuelta may not be out of reach for him, so who knows? Yeah. I mean, I don't know what Sky's strategy is there, but he's got some time to recover, so we'll see. Well, Tim, I have to give him an F. After all that pontificating, I agree with you. I mean, it's hard to criticize a sick rider, and I'm going to give Ryder Haichedal an F too. And the only reason you have to give him that is because they didn't complete the assignment. When you don't turn in the paper, you don't get the grade, and so I feel bad for those two. We've talked about it already, and I can't criticize them for being ill. But if I had to give them a grade based on merit of completing the assignment, they fail. So obviously we have to say just the opposite for Vincenzo Nibali, who has been exactly where he needs to be all the time during this race. Even when he's crashed, he's gotten up quickly and been back to the front. He's looked fantastic on the climbs. He's been the protagonist. Even today, he attacked the entire group towards the top, trying to just get a little bit more time on Wiggins, just in case something, or on Cadel Evans, just in case something happens. So Vincenzo, he's the A+ right now. How about Samuel Sanchez?
Yeah, I think I graded Samuel as a D last week, and although I think he has done better as the week has gone on this week, he's a D for me this week as well. Stage 10, the first summit finish, he lost 4 minutes there. He's never really figured since. I think he's had a couple of decent top 10 finishes, but he's never really looked like being strong enough to grab back some of the time he's lost. He's 17th now, which is pretty much where he was at the end of the first week. So, given that he had clearly stated that this was his big objective for the year, I'm so disappointed, both with him and for him.
Yeah, he tried to do something today on stage 15, but he just didn't have the legs. And after he made his move, then he got shot out the back of the elite group. So I think he's still trying to find the form that he's used to. So let's talk about Taylor Phinney. We picked a look at him. And I think that really the first week is where we had some kind of expectations with the team time trial and that kind of thing. And we gave him a C because obviously BMC didn't have a great first week with those types of efforts. But I've raised his grade a little bit to a B-, and the reason I've done that is because his role now is to be a domestique to Cadel Evans. And on that rain-soaked stage, I think it was stage 10, right, that short stage in the rain, when we saw Wiggins off the back and sick and abandoning, where was Finney? He was at the front with a smile on his face as he looked at the camera, carefully shepherding Cadel Evans to the line to make sure that his GC leader was properly placed and safe at the end of that stage. And, he's a big boy, and he's been going up these mountains. So I got to give him the credit for that.
Yeah, and for sure. And this Giro is all about the learning experience for him. And if you think about what he's been doing, sitting alongside Cadel, helping him along, fighting through the tough weather, over the tough climbs, he is going to come out of this as a much better rider than he was going into it. So, I think he's done really well so far.
Yeah, and then of course we've already talked about Robert Gesink, but we'll just mention him again. You got to give him a D, losing 3 minutes like that on that stage, and then he tried to come back today in stage 15, and attack and try to make something happen, but it just wasn't happening for him. And so again, he shows us that just one bad day for him can put him way down on GC. It's almost like he's missing a piece of that GC puzzle. He hasn't figured out how to manage himself so that he doesn't have one of these bad days that will crush him. So I don't know what his future is, to be honest, Tim. I mean, what is he just going to be a guy who they send to these 5-day races? Because I think Blanco needs a GC guy who can carry on for 3 weeks and be at the front.
Yeah, because as you say, it's that lack of consistency that kills him. And in the Grand Tour, you can't afford to have 3 great days and 1 terrible day.
Yeah. All right, and so Tim, why don't you talk about an A rider, Mark Cavendish?
Yeah, you can't really give him anything other than an A, could you?
No.
2 more wins this week, so he's now got 101 for his career. And the thing about Cav is he doesn't just rack up the easy wins. So of those 101, 40 of them have been in Grand Tours, and only Eddie Merckx has ever reached 40 Grand Tour wins faster than Cav, and only then even by a few months. But he's contested 4 sprints, he's won 4 sprints. 2 of them, stages 1 and 13, were ones where, to all intents and purposes, he had to do it all himself in the final kilometre, and he forced himself over the line from way back with a combination of, of sheer speed, but also sheer will to win. And in that latter respect, he reminds me so much of Robbie McEwen, and that's a real compliment to both of them. This is a guy who refuses to accept defeat, and say he's won 4 stages, and I think they've been the kind of stages where any other sprinter in the world would maybe have won 2 of them.
Yeah, a lot of people on Twitter were saying that Mark Cavendish is better at his job than anybody else at their job in the world. And I'm just saying this. I don't want you to get a big head, Tim, but when we watch Mark Cavendish, we really are seeing a living legend. He will go down in history as one of the best sprinters that we have ever seen. And if he continues, he's still young. If he continues this type of winning, he'll be the best sprinter ever.
Yeah,
no question.
Yeah, for sure. Because he's still only 27. He turns 28 on Tuesday, and we'll be doing something on the blog to mark that. But he's still the scary thing is he's probably still got his best years ahead of him. Yeah,
he's incredible. All right, so that takes us to somebody, his quote competition, John Degenkolb.
Yeah,
how do you rate him, Tim?
Yeah, I think he was a B. I think he achieved his minimum objective of 1 stage win, which he managed on stage 5. That fantastic win with those incredible Gerard Gruber images, and but he pulled out earlier this week citing fatigue. So he's achieved his objectives, but the one thing we haven't seen, the one thing that's really been missing from this race, is that head-to-head battle with Cav. In the end, it never happened. We didn't even get to see it once, and that's terribly disappointing. But he got his stage win, so I think it's reasonable enough to give him a B. Yeah.
And then, last week, Kathy announced that her dark horse was Cadel Evans.
Yeah.
A week into the Giro. So what do you make of him, Tim?
Yeah, I think he's been not so much dark horse as stalking horse. I think Cadel's basically spent the whole of the first 2 weeks sticking to Nibali's back wheel. He's stuck to him more tightly than his shadow. He's not been spectacular, but he has quietly gone about his business with the minimum of fuss. He's always been in the right place at the right time. Yeah, okay, he lost 45 seconds on Saturday's stage, and he did admit it hadn't been his best day, but he's in great shape and he's mentally spot on. And it's been a really pleasant surprise after the poor year he had last year. So yeah, welcome back, Cadell. I think you can have an A-.
Yeah, he's so tough. I mean, I was looking at the images of stage 15 today. Only 2 guys came up to the line with no leg warmers and no arm warmers. Carlos Betancur and Cadell Evans. So those guys are crazy. All right, well, we also talked about looking at Rigoberto Urán and Sergio Henao. And I have to be honest, last week I gave these guys Bs, and this week for Urán, you got to say that he's at least an A-. That move on stage 10 is exactly what Sky needed, especially if they knew that Wiggins was ill. It was someone needed to go on the attack and show some panache and basically get in the top 3 of the Giro d'Italia, and he did exactly that. And then I would say Sergio Henao too. Today he was the protagonist. He went out front to try to put pressure on the rest of the field to chase him down so that Urán could sit wheels. And so those 2 guys basically have become Team Sky's leader for the Giro d'Italia. And who thought that was going to happen at the beginning of the race? Surely I didn't. So, all right, okay. So, Tim, we have been keeping our eye, too, on some of the wildcard teams, the Italian wildcard teams. So why don't you tell us what your thoughts are after week 2 about Androni?
Yeah, so Androni Giocattoli, Venezuela. I will give them a C, I think, and let me just talk through the reasons for that. I think the Androni boys, they've been, as they were in week 1, they've been particularly active in the breakaways, which is probably just as well, because really, in all honesty, they'd be making up the numbers otherwise.
Right.
We had Jackson Rodriguez, who he drew the short straw on both stages 10 and 11. At one point on stage 10, he was in front on his own by 4.5 minutes before he was inevitably swallowed up on the final climb. But great strong performance by him. Lots of airtime, obviously, for the sponsors. And the following day, obviously, he hadn't had enough because he finished 10th. He was in that big 20-man break that was allowed to stay away all day. So he's had a pretty busy week. Then beyond that, Fabio Fellini, he was one of 5 men who survived to within the last 400 metres on stage 12 before Cavan, the peloton, swallowed them up. And then Giario Ermetti was also in the break the following day on stage 13. They contributed towards the chase on the first Alpine stage on Saturday. We saw Diego Rosa go with Sergio Henao on one of the early attacks on that final climb, but that came to nothing. So reasonably active in the breakaways, but you look at them overall. Franco Pellizotti is their best placed rider in 15th. Jackson Rodriguez is 4th in the mountains classification, largely through activity on breakaways. They're still doing pretty well though in the best young rider competition. Diego Rosa's 5th, Fabio Fellini's 7th, but they're both a long way off where Betancur and Micah are.
Yeah. I've been looking at Bardiani, Valvove, CSF, Inox, and I last week I gave him an A. I still have to give him an A. I mean, they've already won on one stage, and any team, domestic team that comes to one of these races and pulls off that kind of victory, they almost won 2, by the way. And then, of course, we've already talked about Stefano Perazzi, who's leading the mountains classification. After stage 15, he's got 65 points, and it's really only Visconti who's looking to catch him with 42 points. So if they can, hold out and win the mountains jersey and have a stage victory and, continue to get in the breaks, they've been aggressive the entire time. I don't see how they can't, write this Giro d'Italia off as one of the most successful things they've ever done. So congratulations. You got to almost congratulate them already for their performance. All right, and how about the glow sticks, Tim?
Yeah, Kathy's glow sticks. I will give them an A-, but there's a kind of a little asterisk that goes next to that. Yeah. I think they kind of kept their light under the proverbial bushel for most of the week before before really literally lighting up the race over the weekend. They put men in breaks. Oscar Gatto's been in a break. Rafael Andriato's been in a break. But other than that, it was largely pretty tame stuff in the early part of the week. We saw De Luca. He threw in a late attack on stage 11, I think it was. But he was swallowed up pretty easily, and I think that kind of underlined what an average rider he now is in his twilight years and post his doping ban. But as I say, the team suddenly lit things up over the weekend. On Saturday we had Sant'Ambrogio,
winning the stage,
and emerging from out of the mist, as we've already talked about, and that's moved him up to fourth on GC, and he's just 1 second off the podium. And then today, Matteo Rabottini, he was pretty prominent as well, wasn't he? He was the last man to be dropped by, or just about the last man to be dropped by Visconti. So, it's I talked about giving them an A minus with an asterisk, and I think with Sant'Ambrogio in the team, it's an A minus. Without him, it would be a C at best. As other than that, they've not really looked like winning a stage. They don't have. He's the only rider they have who's in the top 10 of any of the Jersey competitions. But do you know what? The fact is, Sant'Ambrogio is in the race, so they've got an A minus, and deservedly so.
Yeah, I mean, they're definitely protecting him, and they're definitely all working for him. Yeah. So, if would not be surprised if Sant'Ambrogio finished on the podium, but we'll talk about that in a little bit. Okay, so this week has wrecked Tim and my Giro fantasy teams. So let's check in on our league real quick. Again, thank you all for those of you who joined us. I thought we only had 114, but it turns out we had 115 people who joined our league. And let's just review the new top three, our new podium for after week 2. Our leader now is Team Socks Off Ticked Off Bank. Which is a fantastic name that I didn't see before. Actually, I think that's now my favorite name of the whole league. The director is Machiavelli, and he's got 4,173 points, which is a lot of points. And if you go look at his team, I mean, it is stacked. It's just like, why didn't I pick those guys? And then in second, actually not too far behind, only around maybe 150 points, is Prettiest in Pink, who was first last time by director Colin. He's got 4,017 points. And then, of course, one of our favorite guys, John Baines, his team, La Tête de la Course, has 3,889 points. So chapeau to those guys. We'll see if they can hold on in the final week. I've looked at their teams, and I just don't see how they can't not hold on. So we'll see what happens. Now, as far as the VeloVoices teams go, it's interesting. Tim, you have lost the lead.
I know, it's a disaster.
Cherie is in 12th place with 3,433 points and is now wearing the pink jersey. And I tweeted her that she was in first of the VeloVoices, and she told me that she picked her names out of a hat.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, that's what I said. I said, I believe you. Now, Tim, you are not doing too badly. I mean, again, out of 114 people, you're sitting 21st with 3,281 points. So that is not bad. I mean, that is really not bad.
It's not bad, given that I'm now limping along with only 6 riders left.
Yeah, well, interestingly enough, it's like you and Jack are going for best young rider because he is sitting 22nd. He's only 6 points behind you with 3,275 points. So if you're watching any of the VeloVoices, that's the race to watch right there to see who will finish on top, Jack or Tim. I am still limping back. I have moved up in the standings from last week. I think I was like 49th before. I'm now 46th with 2,886 points. I know I picked up some points today with Benker, but I think you have him as well, so it's not getting me any closer to you. Then we have Ant in 91st place with 2,199 points, and Kitty in 98, our Lanterne Rouge, with 2,074 points. And I heard Ant and Kathy talking on Twitter this week on how they were going to combine the points of their team. And they were going to be called Team Fondant, which I think is a great name for Kitty Fondue and Ant. Team Fondant. Now, if they combined their points, they would just barely be leading the whole league.
But only just.
But only just. So that's where we stand, and it's fantastic. It's fantastic to see the trash talking continue, and it's fantastic to see everybody's team and how they're doing, and how people cheer now. They're like, I don't want that guy on the podium. He's not on my fantasy team. All right, so Tim, tell us what's happening in the final week. Give us a little preview about what's happening in the final week of the Giro d'Italia.
Yeah, so 15 stages down, 6 to go. The racing picks up again on Tuesday after tomorrow's rest day, and stage 16 actually covers a lot of the same roads as stage 15, but in reverse. So it starts in Valois, which is between the Galibier and the Telegraph, and the peloton has to tackle the Col du Mont-Cenis in the reverse direction to what they did today, and then it's flat most of the rest of the way with just a little Category 3 bump 18 kilometres from the end, so shouldn't be too difficult, but the GC boys will need to be watchful that nothing untoward happens on that final little climb. That's then followed by stage 17 between Caravaggio and Vicenza, which is pan flat but with the sting in the tail of a fourth category climb, this time 16 kilometres from the finish, which averages just under 7% gradient, and that will have the sprinters clinging on for dear life. Ahead of a technical descent and then a pretty short flat run to the finish. It's a possible bunch sprint, but it's a long way from being a definite one, and it wouldn't surprise me if this ended up being a sprint contested by a relatively small group that goes off late on.
Yeah.
And then after that we pass into the triumvirate of stages which will decide the Giro. Stage 18 is a 20.6 kilometre uphill individual time trial. It's virtually all climbing, 1,078 metres of vertical gain at an average of 5.7%, and just to make life a little bit more difficult, the steepest and twistiest sections are right up at the top. Now, this will be a test of climbing ability for sure, but it will also be a test of judgment. And it's going to be probably around 40-41 minutes of absolute hell. So having done that, Friday's stage 19 is even harder still. That's got 3 horrible first category climbs to negotiate.
Right.
Yeah. All of them over 2,000 metres. There's the Passo Giao, then there's the Passo del Stelvio, which is the Cima Coppi, the highest point of this year's race.
Yeah.
And finally the new climb of Val Martello, which is over 22 kilometres at about 6.5%, and it's another one of those climbs that has the steepest sections at the top. So I think the riders and the GC guys are going to be faced with a pretty tough choice. There's definite scope for big attacks on this stage, but at what cost? Given what follows it. So it would not surprise me if we saw another breakaway win here, with a lot of the contenders wanting to save their energy for stage 20. So that warms up with a couple of category 2s before it again goes up the Passo Giao en route to the summit finish at Tre Cime di Lavaredo, which is literally the 3 peaks of Lavaredo. And these 3 climbs are brutal. They get progressively more difficult. The first one is just a tough grind. It's mostly at 7 to 8%. The path to the middle peak it's only moderately steep, but it concludes with a big double-digit section with ramps that go all the way up to 18%. And then the final climb to the finish is arguably the toughest climb of the entire race. It's only 4.5 kilometres, but it averages 11.3% with another 18% section near the finish. And if you consider what the riders would have gone to get there, that is going to be a really tough finish. So any sign of tiredness or weakness is going to be ruthlessly exposed here. And at the summit, we will know who the new Giro champion is, because the concluding stage to Brescia is processional and it is flat.
Yeah. Wow. Well, I'll tell you what, that last week, after what these guys have already been through with the weather and some of the parkours, it's just going to, these guys are going to need like a steak dinner or 3 afterwards. Incredible. All right, Tim. Well, we've been sitting on the fence a little bit. So who do you think is going to be 1, 2, and 3 when we head into Brescia next Sunday?
I think top step of the podium, it's really hard to look beyond Nibali. I think barring an absolute nightmare or a mechanical or a crash or illness or something like that, I think he's pretty much nailed on for the top step. And he's got a big advantage already. He's going to take time out of almost everyone in the time trial as well. So going into those last 2 big stages, I think he'll have an even bigger advantage than he does now. So Nibali for the top step. Evans, I think he'll stay strong, and he'll take time in the time trial. So I can certainly see him staying second. And then for third, I am going to go with Sant'Ambrogio, who I've been tipping as my dark horse all along. So I'm going to stick with him.
Yeah, I would love to see Sant'Ambrogio because obviously he's on my fantasy team and he's been earning me some great points. I think you're right. You can't look past Nibali for the top step of the podium, barring obviously some kind of accident or some just ridiculously bad day that he has. And then I agree with you. I don't think Evans is going to lose the type of time that is required for Sant'Ambrogio or Uran or anybody else below him to catch up to him. So. And he's got fantastic handling skills. He's a good time trialer. So, when I was thinking about this, it was between Sant'Ambrogio and Uran, and I think that stage 18 time trial is going to be the difference. And I don't know how Sant'Ambrogio is necessarily against the clock, but I do know how Uran is against the clock, and he's very good. So I'm going to have to go with Uran, but, man, I would love to see Sant'Ambrogio. So... All right, and Kathy would probably pick I don't know, somebody who we haven't listed yet. Elo Kaiser for third. Oh man, she was so right last week though with her prediction of what was going to happen this week. So
she was indeed.
Unbelievable. All right, well that is us for tonight. Tim, thank you. We miss Kathy. It was weird not to have her here, but she'll be joining us again next time. Just a reminder, everybody, please take some time to go look at the blog at www.VeloVoices.com. Follow us on Facebook at facebook.com/VeloVoices, and of course you can always follow us on Twitter at VeloVoices. We look forward to the final week of the Giro, and we'll talk to you the Tuesday after the Giro concludes. Thanks, everybody. Have a great night.
Good night.
VeloVoices. Many voices. One passion. Pro cycling. For fans. By fans.